You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we have some major news out of Fulton County, Georgia. Kenneth Chesebro has officially been paired together for a trial on October 23rd, 2023, with Sidney Powell. What does this mean for Trump and the rest of the Georgia co-defendants now?
So it means that all 17 other co-defendants will have their trial date set for sometime in the future. But really, more importantly, Brian, what it says that is that beginning on October 23rd, we the people, because this trial will be televised, will see virtually all of the evidence that Fani Willis has of the entire RICO conspiracy. Because even though only two conspirators, Chesebro and Powell, are going to trial, DA Willis and her team of prosecutors will prove the entire case, and it will be spectacular. So, talk about must-watch TV beginning on October 23rd. It's on.
Glenn, am I right to be a little concerned about that? Because is there anything that prosecutors here can withhold so as not to show their entire hand and kind of make it easier for Trump when he eventually does come to trial after having seen the whole prosecution's case?
They can withhold certain aspects of the case, certain evidence, but they won't. Here's why. They are going to come out of the gate strong. They're going to want to prove the entire RICO conspiracy and what all of the conspirators did, because a criminal act of one conspirator is a criminal act of all of the conspirators, whether each conspirator personally participated in the crime, whether the conspirator even knew that other conspirators were committing this crime in furtherance of their corrupt enterprise. They are all in it. They are all responsible. The jury can find them all guilty. So it's going to be such a complete presentation of the evidence for a couple of reasons. One, you want to make sure that the jury understands not just what Chesebro did and not just what Powell did, their individual sort of crimes that they committed, but what the entire conspiracy did, because Chesebro and Powell are responsible for it all in the eyes of the law. Not only that, Brian, they're going to want to send the signal to the other 17 conspirators who will be next up at bat in their trials that, listen, you've got nowhere to go. Yeah, you may have previewed the evidence that we have against you, but you have nowhere to run. You have nowhere to hide. So guess what? You still might want to plead guilty and agree to cooperate against your fellow co-conspirators.
So I know that a lot of people are going to be watching this and they're going to be worried about the fact that Trump will be able to preview the prosecution's case here. Is there really nothing to worry about given the fact that this case is so airtight? And even if they do have time to preview what the case will be against Trump, it's not going to change the facts of the case?
Yeah, let me try to set everybody's mind at ease. There's nothing to worry about regarding the fact that Trump and the other co-defendants, co-conspirators are going to get to preview the case. What they're going to see is evidence that's already locked in. What do I mean by that? Witnesses have already testified in the grand jury under oath. That's called locking in the evidence. There's nothing anybody can do about it to undermine it or defeat it. They can certainly cross-examine the witnesses at trial and try to poke holes in the witness's story, try to attack the witness's recollection, but it's all locked in. So when it is previewed for Trump and the other co-defendants who won't be part of that first trial, there's going to be nothing they can do to defeat it when their trial rolls around. They may be able to come up with some cross-examination that they wouldn't have thought of had they been, hit with the evidence for the first time when they were sitting as the defendant at trial. But I'm not at all worried. And the reason, Brian, I'm not at all worried is because I handled RICO cases where we had one big old RICO conspiracy against a criminal organization in Washington, D.C. There were so many defendants, we had to batch them into 3 trials. So I lived this phenomenon of letting the defense attorneys see all of our evidence in trial number 1. Guess what? Everybody in trial number 2 still was convicted.
Okay.
And in trial number 3, guilty verdict. So I am not at all worried about the, previewing the case and how that might work to the benefit of Donald Trump and the other conspirators. I believe Fani Willis has the goods on everybody. And ultimately, I think they're all going to be held accountable.
Okay. Now, does the fact that Chesebro and Sidney Powell being paired together for a speedy trial, does that mean definitively that Donald Trump won't be tried alongside them in this first batch of defendants?
It does, as long as Donald Trump sticks with his speedy trial waiver. What do I mean by that? So there was a 7-page order that was just issued by Judge McAfee dealing with this precise thing. Who's going to go to trial first and who's going to go to trial second, or maybe even third if they break it up into 3 trials. And here is the money line from Judge McAfee's ruling, and it's in footnote 3. And here's what he says, and then we'll sort of unpack it. He says, should any defendant who has not yet filed a waiver of their speedy trial rights invoke the statutory speedy trial deadline before the trial of defendants Chesebro and Powell has commenced, those defendants will immediately join the October 23rd trial. What is the judge telling everybody there? Well, Chesebro and Powell said, we want our speedy trial, and that means their trial will start on October 23rd. Virtually all of the other defendants have signaled to the judge, no. We're going to waive our speedy trial rights because we want to go to trial second, much farther down the road, and we want to be able to preview the prosecution's case. So we will certainly be watching Chesebro and Powell's trial. But what the judge said in that footnote is, should any of those other 17 defendants decide ultimately not to waive their speedy trial rights, guess what? They will immediately be, put in the same trial with Chesebro and Powell beginning on October 23rd. Brian, I predict none of them will do that. Donald Trump has already filed his notice that he's waiving his speedy trial rights. Judge, I do not want to go to trial in October. And so I suspect all 17 of the other defendants will stick with that position, and we'll only see those 2 defendants going to trial in October.
To that point, is there any likelihood that we could see just 2 trials in total, one on October 23rd, 2023, with these 2, with Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesebro, and then another trial with 17 other defendants, or however many remain, depending on how many flips there are?
I would say there's a possibility, but not a likelihood.
Okay.
Judge McAfee actually takes that up in his ruling. He says, look, cases that are this large can just be unwieldy, unmanageable. And in his opinion, he said, the Fulton County courthouse doesn't really even have a courtroom, a space big enough to try 17 or 19 defendants. But he said, how the defendants might be batched together in the future is a question that he will leave for another day. So I would say there may be a possibility that the next trial will include all 17. I don't think it's a likelihood, because I still think you're going to see some of these defendants try to strike guilty plea deals with cooperation. So some of them may drop out. And then ultimately, I would suspect you'll see DA Willis maybe break the remaining defendants, however many don't plead guilty, into maybe 2 groups. Maybe you try 6 or 7 in one group and the remaining defendants in a second trial.
Okay.
Actually, that would be a 3rd trial after the first trial in October.
I guess the obvious question here, which I probably should have asked earlier, did Kenneth Chesebro just get screwed by getting batched with the craziest of the crazies with Sidney Powell?
Yeah, Sidney the Kraken Powell and Kenneth Chesebro. So I'll say it again, it is a cheese and Kraken affair. And I don't think that works to Chesebro's tactical advantage. Why? Because Chesebro is charged for crimes involving him basically being the architect of the fake elector scheme. But that is only one aspect of the criminal RICO enterprise, of the attempts of all of these people to try to overturn the results of the Georgia election. So if he had gone to trial by himself, DA Willis's team naturally would have really focused much of its attention on proving the fake elector piece. Now, as we discussed a few minutes ago, they still would have proved the whole case, but they wouldn't have had to focus on it the way they will now focus on the piece that Sidney Powell was responsible for, which involved, among other things, computer trespass into voting machines. Pretty dramatic stuff, pretty damning crimes. So now that these 2 defendants, who I would say are different spokes in the conspiratorial wheel. All of these spokes, if you picture a wheel, they radiate out from the hub of the criminal enterprise, the hub of the conspiracy, Donald Trump. And now two of those spokes are going to come into full focus for the jury. And I think that actually works to the disadvantage of both defendants.
Okay. And finally, is there any chance with these trials now on the books for just 5 weeks away from today, that Chesebro or Powell can still opt to plead guilty for some type of cooperation deal with prosecutors?
They absolutely can. And it wouldn't shock me if one of them decided to flip. You know, as a prosecutor, my position was always there's never a bad time to accept a good guilty plea with cooperation. What do I mean by that? Ordinarily, I wanted cooperators to come on board early, like when I was investigating the case in the grand jury before I ever indicted anybody. Why? Because then they could help me develop the investigation against the other co-conspirators and against the bigger criminal fish. So I want cooperation early. And when they come to the table early and agree to cooperate, take responsibility for their crimes and testify truthfully against others, they get the most bang for their buck. They get the best deal, maybe a reduced charge, maybe a cap on their ultimate sentence that they might be facing. But then as time goes on and I'm now completing my investigation, their cooperation becomes a little bit less valuable. Still valuable to me. I still want to flip them against the bigger criminal fish, but I need them less and less as time goes on and as my investigation progresses. But ultimately, there's no bad time to strike a good cooperation deal. So even on the eve of trial, if Kenneth Chesebro, for example, said, you know what, you got me. I stayed strong. I went hard for as long as I could. Now I really want to plead guilty and cooperate. I would sit down with he and his attorney. I would explore the nature of the evidence they could provide against the other defendants and the bigger criminal fish. And I would strike that deal, 7 days a week if it turned out it was a good deal for my case. So there's no bad time to bring a cooperator into the fold. So I suspect you're still going to see people flipping, at any, number of different spots along the way.
Well, from your lips to Sidney Powell or Kenneth Chesebro's ears. So we'll see what happens on that front. As I mentioned before, we are now only 5 weeks away from this first trial happening in earnest. Again, it'll be televised, so we'll be able to watch all of it. And of course, Glenn and I will stay on top of everything as soon as it progresses. So if you're watching right now and you want to stay on top of this stuff, please make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.